You take the first two films, Blood Simple, going from that to Raising Arizona, it's a huge change in kind of feeling and approach, really, even if not in exactly how you construct shots.
After you've spent however many months or years or whatever it is working on a particular kind of movie or shooting a particular kind of movie, if you've just spent 4 months shooting a big landscape movie, you're not so anxious to go back out and shoot another big landscape movie. You think maybe it would be fun to go in a studio and be able to control the sets and what you're looking at in a different way and not have to worry about the sun, So it comes partly from that too.
So how did the ideas come about then? I mean, was that going from Blood Simple to Raising Arizona to Miller's Crossing? I mean, 3 very different movies. Did you deliberately go down a different path? Say, now we're going to write a film that's kind of a dark noirish film about,
Well, I think the very first one we wrote was the most calculated in a way, because not having ever done it before and not knowing really how we were going to finance it, I think what we were doing was that a certain part of our thinking about it was that at the time, which is early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, the movies that were being made independently, the way we were sort of looking to finance this movie, were for the most part horror films. So we thought, well, we're going to do something let's do something which is essentially we can sort of convince people is a horror film, when in fact there were other things sort of more interesting to us that we wanted to sort of get into the story. We were sort of more attracted to certain kinds of noir thrillers and hard-boiled fiction from the sort of 20s and 30s and wanted to bring those elements into it. So it ended up that I think the movie ended up being a bit of a hybrid between a horror film and a sort of murder thriller film. But we weren't advertising that part of it. We were sort of advertising the horror film part of it. After that, I think we then felt free to, write about whatever we were interested in without being quite that calculated.
Yeah.
Do you like the writing process?
Yes. Well, I think I'm one of those people that I think if this medium didn't exist, my social existence would have been much more circumscribed, because I'm by nature more solitary than I am social. But what spending a life making movies has done, I think, is sort of offered me a social existence in something which I've come to really appreciate. And one of the things I like most about making movies, which is that it's a collaborative enterprise, not a solitary enterprise like writing or painting pictures or doing that. And that's kind of that's the thing I most like now about making movies. And I've really liked from the beginning, but it's not necessarily my temperament. So, yes, I like to write and I like to edit, because, you can pretend, you work in a bank and go into work at 10 in the morning and go home at 4. And it's a lot easier on your body. But making movies and shooting movies is important. And I know directors who actually don't like shooting. And I don't understand it. Yeah. I don't get it. I don't get how you spend your life doing this and not, if you don't actually like doing that,
But was it a kind of shock, though? I mean, how did you feel when you turned up on set with like 200 people, like you were saying earlier?
Yeah, well, it was very weird. Ethan, and then the first, the first real movie set I was ever on was the first day of shooting our first movie. I'd never been on a movie set before.
Wow, you must have been thinking it's so weird. Everybody keeps asking you questions and I won't leave you alone.
Yeah, no, it was very weird. It took me a while to. It took me a good 2 or 3 weeks to sort of, I think, recover from that in some weird way, that you feel like you're being assaulted. If you look at pictures of me, photographs of me during the first few weeks of shooting our first movie, they're a little scary. because I don't look well.
I've always felt that, you and Ethan always knew exactly what the end product was going to be, but somehow you were very collaborative on set. I always felt I was part of something that was a jigsaw puzzle.
Here's the interesting thing about that. I think it took me a couple of movies to understand, and it's interesting because I'm probably the very few movies that we made before we met you, Roger, right? To understand that the collaboration on a movie set is not a threat to your idea. Because when you're young, when you're a kid, you're very defensive about your ideas, and you're very defensive about your process. You think somehow the Alfred Hitchcock thing, that when you start shooting, the only thing that can happen is something's going to go wrong. You've made the movie in your head, and now you have to start shooting it, and it's never going to measure up to what's in your head. So you get very defensive about it. And I think that's a disease of first-time directors or very young directors. And then I think if you're open to it temperamentally, then you realize pretty quickly that actually what's happening is that all those people are making the thing richer and more interesting than you could ever do by just defending your ideas and getting what you want, And so as soon as I think you make that realization and you enjoy the people that you're working with and you found the right people to work with, then it becomes a totally different thing. Now it's just about how you're making this thing together, and none of it's a threat to that idea. But I have to say, as a very young person, I think I had to get into that idea. I wasn't there immediately,
Do things change all the way into the editing? Does much change during the editing process?
Well, yeah. I mean, Roger, I think that, for all the storyboarding we do, we don't actually look at them much on the set. We often follow them closely in certain situations, but then, and I think they're a good tool for other departments and other people to look at, and it's helpful. But that, I think in a strange way, they're just, again, a temperamental sort of affinity to having a plan, not wanting to extemporize completely when you get on a set. And I like having them because you've got a plan in the back of your head that you can always fall back on. So if you go, what the fuck do I do? You go, well, I did have this idea.
Right. Well, what the hell?
But on the other hand, and sometimes that's the right idea. But on the other hand, sometimes you get on the set and you go, well, things aren't cooperating. And we've been in situations together hundreds of times where we went, well, that's not going to work. So what do we do? Right. Or this is an opportunity here. I mean, do you remember when we were shooting True Grit and we had this idea about the opening shot in the movie? And it all had to do with sort of laying down fog in a specific exterior location. And we struggled with it for about 2 hours. And then we went, well, good idea, but you know what? That's not how it's going to break, so what else do we do? I mean, that stuff happens all the time.
And don't you think that the process of storyboarding just helps you kind of in your mind organize your thoughts about the script and what's important in each scene, because it's just another process to go through and to say, okay, this scene, she's really important in this scene. And so when you do all that storyboard process, later you've got that benefit.
It's like focusing in on how to visually interpret it, isn't it? It's not necessarily the exact frame. It's just like the balance of a scene.
Well, I think that's exactly what it is. It's the last draft of the script, in a way.
Yeah.
If the last draft of the script is taking it out of the screenwriter mode and into the sort of visual movie, shot by shot, visual interpretation mode. Yes.
Yeah, the other thing that's related to this is the fact that you never shot much film. Your film to cut ratios were so low relative to any other director I've worked with, for sure. I mean, was it Fargo was 150,000 feet of film, which is like ridiculous.
Yeah, Fargo was the really funny one. I remember being in the cutting room.
For many reasons,
when we were still cutting on film. And, you would put the film in these little white boxes on racks on the wall. And there was like 1/4 of one wall with a bunch of boxes. And that was the whole movie. That was everything we shot. It was a little disturbing looking at it, actually. But no, we shot almost nothing on that movie.
Yeah, but even the other movies, there's pretty low ratios. Does that go back to the way you started out making your own films with just in the cassette with no cutting? Or what? I mean, there's something you have the other thing I remember most about first working with you and when it was on film for sure is that sometimes after the first take we'd say, okay, you'd look at Ethan, you'd nod and you'd go, okay, what do we do now? And I go, another take, please.
Yeah.
I'd have to plead for a second take.
That's very funny.
What is that? Is that from your childhood, your early days making movies? Or there's some sort of assurance you kind of know more than any other director I've ever worked with, really. You have a confidence in early takes.
Well, that's a charitable way of looking at it. The other way is just that we're just not perfectionists.
Yeah, well, there is that. I didn't want to go there, Joe.
Yeah, that'll do for our little movie. Yeah. Well, I think there are two things. One is, it is true that I've never understood, the Stanley Kubrick thing where he does 90 takes of an insert of someone opening a doorknob. I think part of it comes from when I got out of film school, I was working as an editor. Before we made our first movie, as small as it was, my professional experience was all in editing rooms. And I was working with a very, very interesting woman who really taught me a lot about how to make movies, probably more than I learned in film school. And she was cutting horror films, actually. And so I do think that from the outset, we had a strong sense of what we needed editorially, and what we didn't need. And I think that may have something to do with it. I guess you have to have some instinct for how much do I need to shoot so that at the end of the day, I'm going to have what I need to make this scene work, And then there's the pressures of sort of low budget filmmaking, which is you can't spend, 6 months shooting the movie, and you have to move on, and you have to have some instinct for when you can move on. I don't really know. I have to say, the last few movies that we've done, we actually have, this is a whole other discussion, but we have shot digitally. And one of the things that I think actors are becoming more used to, and even on the set, I can't even control it to a certain extent, is, okay, let me go again. Okay, let me go again. Okay, let me go again on the same slate. Right?
Oh, no,
which I never used to do. It's like, if I haven't slated it, it's not there, So we got to cut the camera. We cut the camera, we go again. Cut the camera, and we go again.
Yeah.
And it's one of the things that's one of the more irritating things about sort of the difference on movie sets now than I think it used to be. And it's harder for me to sort of control that aspect of it, because it's always like, all right, one more, and I'm like, yeah.
Well, it's kind of like technology kind of pushed us that way. It's not the technology in essence, is just what you can do with it, isn't it? Right. It's like playback. How many actors like to see playback between takes even, which slows the whole process down. And I sit there behind the camera, think we could have done 2 takes now while they're watching the playback. Does this make any sense? Just do another variety. You know what I mean?
I do but know. Then the other thing, I remember making movies with you where you would be operating and there was no monitor. And after the take, I would say, how did it go? When you were going over here, when you were tracking or moving or panning over to something, you go, no, there was a glitch at this point, and we go, okay, let's do it again.
Yeah, then you turned to Andy and said, did you get that one?
Yeah. Instead
of having to play back to look at focus, you just you trust Andy. I would anyway. Right. And, that kind of thing, when you've got all this technology to make the process theoretically faster and easier, and it's sort of slowing it down in some strange way.
There was one interesting exception. I don't know if you remember this. When we were making The Big Lebowski, we started the first 2 weeks, and there was no playback capacity on the set. And Jeff Bridges was very upset about it because he wanted to be able to look at playback. Yeah. And I was very leery, and we had never worked with Jeff before. I didn't want to do it because I was afraid that Jeff was then going to come over after every take and look at the playback. And finally, he was so miserable at the end of the second week, we got playback. And the interesting thing to me was that Jeff, who's an actor who sort of totally grew up making movies. I mean, he is a screen actor. He's not in any way a stage actor. He's a screen actor. He used it very well. Every now and then he would come over and look at the playback, and he was great, actually. He'd go, okay, I get what the problem is, and was useful, you know. But he's an exception because oftentimes in most cases, it's a time waste or it's actually counterproductive, I think.
Certainly, if we want to talk about digital.
I'm much more, as you know, I have a long history with the difference between film and digital. I'm completely sort of enamored now of certain aspects of digital photography. Yeah. But just like anything else, you go, it's a technological medium. The technology moves on. The technology, on balance, always or almost always affords possibilities that you wouldn't have had earlier, and you don't want to lose. You don't want to go backwards. On the other hand, there are artifacts and aspects of the old technology which wither, and it's very unfortunate that those things get lost then forever because they're not practiced anymore, you know?
Right.
And those are parts of the art form that essentially disappear. And it's the disappearance of those things that you kind of mourn, even though you kind of know, well, you have to keep marching on. And it's always been like that. I'm sure since the beginning of movies, it's those things wither and die.
Yeah, absolutely. Getting back to, editing and coverage and the amount of film or pixels you shoot these days is very low. Do you ever get in the cutting room and, well, you say your experience in the editing room led you as well to do fewer takes and know the coverage you wanted. But I've worked with a director who had been an editor, and they wanted to shoot everything with like 5 cameras and just shoot. Right. So do you ever get in the editing room and think, well, I don't have enough coverage? Like on Fargo, I mean, you joke about how few trims there were in the room, but you didn't really need anything more, did you?
No.
Or did you?
No, at the end of the day, I don't think we did. But actually, the short answer to your question is yes, it does happen. Yeah, you go, I was a fucking idiot for not. Why didn't I turn the camera around and get an angle on so I could cut, there? Or why did I shoot? Yeah, so it does happen. But I think it's what we were talking about before. If you have some instinct for what you need, the minimum amount you need, even if you're missing something to make a scene work, it's amazing what you can do in an editing room. And this is one of the things that this woman, Edna Paul, this woman I worked with after I got out of school, taught me. She said, look, it's not what you were planning on doing, right? It's not what the script says. It's not what the storyboards say. It's just what the footage says. So look really closely at the footage. And usually the footage is going to tell you what to do and what you can do. And it's going to tell you that there are more ways of doing this than you expected, right? Yeah. She's that was a really deep lesson. And I think it's true. I think if you have some instinct for coverage, even if you miss something here and there, you go, but you know what? I can cut from here to here to here, or I know enough about editing, so even though this is a goofy cut, I can make it work because I know if I cut on a certain kind of movement, nobody's going to notice. It's all kinds of ways of sort of of getting yourself out of trouble that way. On the other hand, we have done things where we've cut the film, as you know, and then we've gone back and shot, well, I need this insert, or we didn't get this shot, and let's shoot it now.
But some directors, quite a lot of directors, will say, well, we like working with an editor because the editor watches dailies without any preconceived ideas.
Yeah, it's a good idea.
I knew you would react like that. No, it just, again, going back to the I think when you and Ethan start writing a script, you have such a concept of the whole thing that you know, like on The Man Who Wasn't There, I remember we shot a scene as a sort of profile 2 shot, and it was like 10 o'clock in the morning by the time we got a good take of that. And then we said, oh, who do you want to start on overs? And you both looked at each other and, overs? I said, they're here on the storyboards. And you said, no, we don't need overs. And I said, well, what are we going to do now then? And he said, well, we better go home or something like that, because there was nothing else to do.
Those were the good old days when we went home at 2 in the afternoon. I was just watching a George Stevens movie, A Place in the Sun, the other day.
Oh, yeah.
And there's an intense scene between Montgomery Clift and Shelley Winters. He puts the camera behind Shelley Winters, kind of high, over her back, and plays the whole scene on Montgomery Clift. And Shelley Winters has got all the emotional shit going on in that scene, and he never cuts to her. It's one shot. And ordinarily you go, there's no, how did he know that was going to work? I mean, actually, there are two questions. How did he know that was going to work? And did he shoot the other angle and we're just not seeing it,
Right.
But it's extraordinary because there's no coverage in that scene, and it's completely counterintuitive. And it also goes along with, there was a certain different kind of style of filmmaking and cutting then, too, which is, not the same as it is now. But the scene completely works, and he had some instinct for why that was the case. And I think that's something I don't quite know how to put this, but, and I don't want to sound snotty, and at certain times, everybody thinks they can make a movie. And I go, well, you know what? Everyone can make a movie, but everyone doesn't know what George Stevens knows, right?
Yeah.
And that's the kind of difference. It's you're either kind of suited to the medium. It's a medium that you understand deeply, and maybe the only thing you understand deeply. The only medium you understand deeply, and that's the difference, So, and those are the people that are really interesting to watch. It's not, even though other people who make movies can make fabulous movies that are really, really great, there's a difference, Yeah. So it's interesting.
Do you go back and watch movies a lot? And who are your favorite filmmakers now? Has it changed since when you were a kid?
Kurosawa has always been one of my favorite filmmakers because he's essentially a sort of narrative dramatist, you know what I mean, who had such a unbelievable, he had that sort of level of craft that you were talking about. The way it's almost impossible to analyze how he manages to infuse his movies with drama through kind of the way he moves the camera and how he constructs scenes. But he was essentially a dramatist. And then you have somebody like Alfred Hitchcock, who I liked as a kid, and I still like because he's just a pure formalist. In a way, he was a guy who said, I'm going to concentrate on one genre of movies. It's about making people jump in their seats. But what I'm really interested in is, almost in an avant-garde way, is just the formal aspects of movie making. He's kind of, and then the third one would be somebody like Fellini, who is kind of a guy who brought a certain sort of sense of humor, and he's a clown with an unbelievable sort of visual eye. So, and also was a guy who managed to make movies that had no sort of coherent narrative structure. He's not about drama. So those were the sort of three people that I sort of most admired as a kid, I think. And there are movie makers I didn't like as a kid who I've grown to appreciate as I've gotten older. I didn't like John Ford when I was a kid. I thought those movies were kind of boring and hokey, and And as I've gotten older, I've sort of gotten to appreciate him as a filmmaker more than I used to. Orson Welles. I wasn't into Orson Welles. He was one of those guys who go, yeah, I know he's a genius, but I just don't like his fucking movies. And I've kind of gotten a different sort of kind of appreciation for Orson Welles.
In Fargo, when you read Bill Macy's part.
When we wrote the script for Fargo, we were imagining the character as being very different temperamentally and physically. So, and the actors we started seeing for that part were more in line with our original conception. So we thought that the character should be a little overweight and uncomfortable in his body, a little bit of a schlub, that the way he spoke would be a little bit different. And Macy came in for another part. He came in for the part of the accountant, right?
Oh.
And he read the part of the accountant and he said to us, which is kind of more natural for him in a way, for a casting director. So he comes in and he reads that part and he says before he left the room, he said, I was reading the other part and it's really interesting. And I would you please let me just read that too? And we were, okay, sure, go ahead. So he read it and we thought, okay, this is a better idea. What he's doing here is better than that original conception. And we just cast him in the part. So it's that was very unusual, but it came from him with an idea about how to play it and essentially convincing us in a room by reading it.
When you write scripts, are you sometimes writing with a particular actor in mind?
Often, yeah. And even from the beginning. So even Blood Simple, where we hadn't made a movie before, we wrote that part that Emmett Walsh played because we'd seen him in a number of things, including this movie called Straight Time, which was an Uwe Grossbard movie with Dustin Hoffman, and thought...
That was a great movie, wasn't it?
Yeah, very good movie.
Harry Dean Stanton was in it,
Harry Dean Stanton, Emmett, Dustin Hoffman. Yeah, it's a good movie. And Emmett was interesting in it. He played a parole officer. And we thought, okay, let's write this with him in mind and then send him the script.
Hudsucker was quite a lot of money. And then you go from that to Fargo, which was quite little money.
Yeah.
I remember you saying to me, well, you might not want to do it because there's no money or something.
Yeah.
I don't know what you're talking about. Did you feel restricted, though? Or was it almost liberating that you were...
I didn't feel restricted at all. In fact, I look back at making Fargo as one of... Even though there were some issues, as you recall, with crew and unions and all that stuff in the middle, it was a bit of a fracas. But and we were shooting outside in the cold and all of that, and we didn't have any money. But I kind of remember that as being an incredibly, by and large, a very pleasurable shooting experience. And so no, I didn't feel that. I didn't feel that really. Hudsucker was a little different. Hudsucker, I'm glad we had the opportunity, honestly, to work, again, if you're talking about technology, to work with, those models that we made and those in a way that it was kind of the very end of that,
Yeah.
And that we were able to sort of get into that at a certain level and just have some fun thinking about how to make that stuff work and do that before it kind of disappeared. So,
where did the idea for The Man Who Wasn't There come from? It's one of our favorite movies.
That was great because we were able to make a black and white movie. If I could do everything in black and white, I think I would.
Yeah.
Since you write the scripts, do you prefer the actors to read it, since you know the rhythms so well and everything, to use the actual dialogue and not improvise?
Well, people think we don't like improvisation, and I guess to a certain extent that's true, but I think it's an overstatement. I remember on Fargo once Bill Macy saying he was struggling with how to say a line, and I could tell how he was struggling, because the line was he was like saying in the script it was can't ba. He was struggling. The idea is he was struggling in the text. And I remember walking up to him and saying, Bill, the idea here is just that you're struggling with what words to use. You don't literally have to do it the way we wrote it. And Bill was like, no, 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 I want to do it exactly as you wrote it. And I was like, well, okay, fine, but it's not Shakespeare, I mean, I'm just, generally, I guess it's true. We write it a certain way and we prefer if you don't make up your own dialogue. But if you've got a better way of putting it, then great, put it that way. Music is a really interesting and tricky thing. I tend to generally think that it's overused in most movies. There's too much score, that it's people use it to fix things as opposed to, and it is useful that way. You can fix a lot, but with it, and sometimes you have to. I think it's often used kind of in the wrong way or too much.
What's your feeling about long-form television?
Well, the thing is, I think this is very much, something Ethan and I used to talk about when, also it came up in the context of Buster Scruggs because it was an episodic thing. It was, different stories. But I don't think as writers, when we would sit down to write something together, just aesthetically or temperamentally, it was, long form was never something we could really get our heads around. And there's so much about, I think, television. It's a different paradigm. I mean, and not to be sort of shitty about it, but, you can look at stories as, they have a beginning, a middle, and an end, right? But so much of television is that it's got a beginning, a middle, a middle, a middle, a middle, until the whole thing dies of exhaustion. It's been beaten to death, and then you figure out a way of ending it. You know what I mean? That's how long form television works, or a lot of it, right? So it's a hard thing to get your head around. And in fact, what we were interested in, I think Ethan and I, in the last thing was how to write short things. What shorter things might look like. But I've seen good stuff that I have, there's been good stuff that has long form. I think that's also true, by the way, I think it's also true of documentaries now. Documentaries now are 10 hours long.
You obviously make films for the cinema, right? But how do you feel about making films for television?
I think like every filmmaker, or like many filmmakers, I'm very conflicted about it. On the one hand, we're all disturbed by the prospect of doing what we do to be seen on ever diminishing platforms. On the other hand, when Ethan and I got into the business, the only reason we've been able to make movies, the kinds of movies we made, had a financial backstop, the ancillary markets of home video, which is essentially television. So our whole career really was made possible by the fact that there was a television market. So for me to now say, oh, I'm not going to make anything to see it on Netflix, I kind of go, well, that's kind of odd. So I can't be precious about it. I can't be sort of Chris Nolan about it or Quentin Tarantino. I go, look, I want my movies to be seen on big screens. And in fact, I would like anything that's seen primarily on television. I would like the people who ordinarily would go to my movies in a movie theater and want to see it that way to at least have the opportunity to do that. That would make me very happy. And then let everyone else see it on TV.